Hello, everyone, and welcome to Press Coverage, part of the Going for Two Live network. I'm your host, Kyle Senra, as always, and for this episode, I'm joined by Jordan Richards. Thanks for joining me as a guest, Jordan. How are you doing?
No problem. I'm good. I'm good. Happy to be here. I'm excited. I will tell you straight up, this is the longest show sheet I've ever got. I'm not used to even doing show sheets myself on my own show. So this will be a good one. This will be a good one. I'm going to be prepared. I was getting my last minute answers in before we started the show. I'm excited to be here. It'll be fun, man. I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me on, Kyle. And I'm excited to talk some football with you today.
Yeah, big, deep, important question. So requires a big, deep, important show sheet, I guess. Hopefully some fun times. Nothing too serious here, but
Absolutely.
serious sports fans is what we are. So serious Canadian sports fans on that. So I guess interesting perspective. What were your first introduction to sports and your first memories?
My first memory, actually, it's funny that when I saw this question, I was like, I don't really even look at it as my first memory. But one of my very first memories of sports in general was actually when I met Vince Carter. So when I was probably like 6 years old or so, maybe even 7 years old, I was in a Loblaws and at a random space where they had room for kids to like play around, whatever. I don't even know why grocery stores let people do this, but they could. And there was this random contest that you could just enter. So I just like as a little kid filled up my name, blah, blah, whatever. My parents were like, "Oh, it's such a waste of time. You're never gonna win." Blah blah blah. And of course, I did win. Right. So I was able to go to this basketball camp with Vince Carter. I met him, took a picture. We like had some shoot around. I was able to bring like 4 or 5 friends. And that to me, I think is really like my first memory of sports. I remember watching Raptors games or remember watching football games. Nothing really sticks out. But that for me was like a very big moment. It's the first time I ever met an athlete. First time like anything like that. To see a dude 6'6", Vince Sanity. This is like when he had MVP chants in the crowds. It was really, really awesome. Probably my first real sports memory, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and I think that we hear that a lot in Canada here, so I don't know how much that gets translated to the States, but like the impact of Vince Carter and basketball
Yeah.
in Canada in general, and how it's so well positioned. Just how many there's a string of years where there's a top 5 NBA pick every year. That seemed like there was a Canadian every year in that range. So just the idea of it probably grew so much because he winning the
Yeah.
slam dunk contest.
Hmm.
He was responsible for the Raptors' first playoff series wins at a time. I actually was one for a while. Now
Yeah.
this new era now is pretty good, but it's interesting that we're doing this tonight live on April 2nd, 2022. It's actually Kyle Lowry's return to Toronto as the Heat are taking on the Raptors tonight. So
Yeah.
interesting that we go talk about one
Tomorrow.
legend
It's
from.
tomorrow.
Oh, it's tomorrow. Sorry.
Yeah, it's tomorrow. No, no problem. But yeah, it's tomorrow. He's coming back. It'll be interesting for sure. But I'm excited. I'm excited to watch it. I think he's been back once before, but every time he comes back, man, the crowd just goes crazy every time. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's he's such a phenomenal player. Those are probably the two greatest players in franchise history for the Raptors.
So, question for you: would you put him number one, or would you have Vince number one? Because there's a lot of people who say that Lowry is like the best Raptor of all time now, just because of what he did
It's funny.
to win the championship and bring it home.
I have gotten into a debate with a friend, I guess, and my name's Kyle, so maybe that also is a little biased. But I don't necessarily remember watching too much of the Carter era, but I've watched
Yeah.
so much of this DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry, and Kawhi Leonard era. But yeah, I kind of lean towards Kyle Lowry there, just how. How great he was a point guard, and especially the clinching game, game 6 in the finals. Right off the bat, I think he had made 4 buckets in the first quarter. I think the first 4 buckets for the Raptors, so kind of got them off to a good start. And the whole game, the Warriors were trailing, and you make them chase the whole time. And it's kind of a different dynamic if they get the early lead. So Lowry's impact to me in a championship team kind of leans towards that. But I get look at Vince Carter, how long he played, over 20, it's over 20 seasons in the NBA, just a
Yeah.
great shooter, had the skills, clearly a phenomenal player and phenomenal athlete, and took care of himself enough to be able to have such a long career.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you said, Vince Carter, I believe he's the only player to play in 3 different decades, which is just a crazy random stat because he played in the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s as well. And then I think it stretched into 2021, right, when he ultimately, or 2020 when he ultimately retired. Or I guess it'd be 4 different decades. So just crazy stat for Vince Carter playing that long. That longevity is amazing. Like I said, I did meet the guy, so small bias, but I think you are definitely right. I think it's Lowry with that championship really puts him over the top as far as greatest Raptors ever go.
So was basketball your favorite sport growing up because of that pivotal moment?
No, not really actually. I am named Jordan after Michael, as I'm sure
Oh.
many people wouldn't be too difficult to guess, right? But for me, it was always football. It was always my dad's favorite sport, and it's just kind of what we gravitated to in my house. And I liked basketball, but it was never really one that I played. It's funny because I'm not super tall. I'm like 6'2", but everyone when they see me when I was like working wherever, they'd be like, "Oh, you're tall. You're probably good at basketball." And it's like by far my worst sport. Not even close. But yeah, I was definitely a football house through and through. Watched a bit of tennis and stuff too. So got into a bit of everything, some baseball, but mostly football for sure. And that's kind of where the fandom and the fantasy and everything, you'll see it kind of tie in throughout the rest of the show for sure.
Well, I mean, you could tell you are a good co-host of morning show because the transitions are well. Because what did make the jump from just watching sports and participating in sports, but with the interaction with the professional sports and fantasy sports in general?
So for me, actually, it started at a pretty young age. I want to say I was in grade 6, grade 7, so probably around like 11, 12 or so. And that's when I really started doing fantasy football. And it was literally just like most people, me and my buddies, we were like, we heard of fantasy football or we listened to a few podcasts on ESPN or wherever they were from. And we're like, oh, that'd be fun. Like, let's see what happens. Let's, try and draft. Let's compete. Let's see who the best manager is, right? Because, all of us were big Madden heads. We play Madden every day. We play Madden against each other. We're like, we can build the best rosters, draft the best rookies, develop the best game plan. We're like, we can definitely do this. Like, come on, how hard could it really be? Like everybody, right? And so what ended up happening was, that kind of matured over and over. And I've been playing ever since, honestly. But, me and my friends, it was just competing early on and we did that. And that was awesome. And eventually, it grew into maybe I want to like talk about fantasy even more, like more than all my friends, more than all my buddies, and get into Dynasty. And it just honestly it just grew from a young age. And we played baseball, basketball. I tried golf a couple times, IDP leagues, Dynasty. Like now I'm in Devy League, C2C. It's just growing and expanding more and more every day. Even DFS and stuff and being, around for the explosion of that because some people weren't even able to play DFS back in the day, but like I was playing DFS, I think even when I was still in high school. It was still available, and especially more so when I was in college. And it's just seeing this sport grow as just like fantasy in general has been crazy. And now obviously the betting side of it is taking an even larger part of the pie overall.
Yeah, for sure. Just the constant evolution, right? And like you said, the word compete. Everyone loves
Yeah.
competition, and however we can compete, it's always great.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the fantasy community is growing. Lots of people coming in, interacting. Shane Manila's here. He's saying Bryant Reeves is the greatest Canadian player ever.
Sure. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I don't hate it. That's fine. I mean, I'm sure a better one will come around eventually, but I'm fine with Reeves for now.
And I mean, if you also want to interact, any listeners or viewers out there watching the live show, of course, tonight, feel free to head over to the Going for Two live YouTube page or over on Twitch, as well as the Going for Two live Facebook page. You can watch the video on Twitter, but the comments won't work. We can't see them at all. So
Yeah.
I don't know. You guys have more intro too, so you know the problems of the YouTube life, the restream life.
Yeah, restreaming their Twitter issues. That's just match made in heaven, I guess. Once Twitter decided to go away with Periscope, it's just all bets are off now. You got to go to YouTube and figure it out.
Betting, right? It's always back to betting, but apparently Shane wants some pushback. All right, it's Steve Nash. It's very clearly Steve Nash is the greatest Canadian player ever. Just tremendous ability to pass the ball, score as well. Great shooter. I believe there was one point where there were 7 years in a row where his offense was the highest scoring offense in the NBA, and it was a few years with Dallas and a few years with Phoenix, and it seamlessly crossed over. So it kind of showed that like he was the offense. And a couple of years in Phoenix, won 2 MVPs, the only Canadian player to do that in the NBA. So that's my answer. There goes Steve Nash.
Steve Nash is good. He's fraudulent MVP in some regards, but he's definitely one of the greatest Canadian athletes of all time, and probably the best Canadian basketball player for now. But we'll see. Maybe a Canadian player will take a run for his money. I know that I'm sure Jamal Murray will have something to say about that by the time his career is over. But again, recency bias. Love Steve Nash, but Jamal Murray's pretty good himself.
Oh yeah, Jamal Murray is pretty great. Hopefully a good recovery from that ACL tear. Has he again? As much as I do kind of follow the Raptors, has he returned yet this season, or is he still sidelined?
No, he got injured, I believe, either right at the end of the season or even in the playoffs last year. So he's not even back yet. He hasn't returned with Denver. I believe Denver is going to make the playoffs. And I know that he was potentially going to return, but I don't believe that they're necessarily sure when he's going to come back. But hopefully back this season. Just depends on how far they get and ultimately kind of how they do in the playoffs. But I think first round seems unrealistic and second round is like a maybe for Jamal Murray this year.
Okay, so yeah, so definitely, yeah, playoffs only if that's the case. But yeah, hopefully he comes back. And I know Shane's mentioning that Steve Nash had excellent hair, but maybe
He
Jamal
did.
Murray will become the heir apparent to Steve Nash as that greatest Canadian basketball player title.
Definitely.
Now, moving on. So again, jump from just watching and again playing sports to getting to fantasy football and fantasy sports. But when did you make the jump into content creation? Like you're saying, you eventually realized you wanted to talk about it more. So how did that process go?
I believe I was watching, it was Georgia versus Oklahoma in I believe it was the college football semifinal. I believe it was the first semifinal ever. And this was back when Nick Chubb and Sony Michel were in the same backfield. Sony Michel iced the game against Oklahoma. And I believe
Baker
it was the
Mayfield, Oklahoma,
Cotton
right?
Bowl. Yeah, it was Baker Mayfield, Oklahoma
Okay.
versus Sony Michel, Nick Chubb, Georgia team. And I was like, man, I think that Sony Michel is better than Nick Chubb. I was like, I think he is. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll write an article about it. And maybe I'll submit it to a few websites. And I did. That article I believe is still up today on Dynasty Nerds. I sent it out to Rich Dodson, and he was like, "Yeah, I'd love to have you join the site to write." And that was kind of how I got my first start. Was I thought that Sony Michel was better than Nick Chubb. I had the courage of my conviction, as they say, to put that out there into the ethos. And boy, was I wrong. The first take I ever put out there was very, very, very wrong. But that's just how it goes sometimes, and you're never going to get everything right. But yeah, that was kind of how it all got started, and just snowball from there. You write more articles, you do more things, you meet more people, interact with the community more. And it's interesting the way it all happened, because I never felt like it was really a path that I wanted. I just kind of did it. And things happen and things kind of move forward. And ultimately this is just how I kind of got here. It's been a wild ride, and I don't know how to even say that I made it here. It just kind of happened, and I'm excited that it happened, and happy to be here on the show today.
Just be in the moment, be ready for the opportunities, and just go on the journey, and then see where it takes you.
Literally, man. Like I can't tell. People ask me all the time, like, "Oh, Jordan, what can I do? How do I do it?" I'm like, to be honest, like I never really wanted this. Like I feel bad sometimes because there's people in the community that are like, I want to have this person follow me, or I want to write for this site, or I want to have this many subscribers, this many followers, this many viewers, whatever. And I feel like I almost take it for granted because it was never something that I really strive for. It just so happened that I had a certain skill set that matched with someone else. And, we ended up working together. And now all of a sudden, like things are really taking off. And it just kind of happened that way. But what I would say to a lot of people is that there's always going to be opportunities available to you. You just have to, like you said, be ready for them, because they could come at any moment. And for me, it was a big transitional time in my life when, the pandemic started, like a lot of people. But for me, it was more so, do I want to create content for fantasy, or do I just want to create content, right? That's kind of how that all started from the beginning. Is like I was into fantasy, but I almost kind of fell out of love with it and kind of got off Twitter a little bit for a while. But it came down to, do I want to make content for fantasy people, or do I want to make content that I'd be proud of watching and be proud of viewing and all these things? And so it was a big conundrum for me kind of early on in the content game, because this wasn't necessarily something that I wanted, but it was something that I was able to do because of the resources and connections that I had in the space.
Yeah, Sony Michel. Imagine that. But it's funny because I think back to Dynasty Nerds that year. I remember listening to the podcast, and they seem like as a group were really high on Sony Michel anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if A, they saw your work, oh he, smart mind, think alike, or
Yeah.
B, I wonder if you influenced that take on them and it pushed them, because I think at one point Rich might have talked about Michelle as the RB2 in the class. So maybe
Yeah,
your influence a
and
little.
like I said, honestly, I don't know if it was my influence. I wouldn't go that far personally, but definitely it was. I felt like I had the data to support it in some regard. But this is, the very baseline analysis. Like I didn't know anything about no breakout age or dominator rating. I was just a kid who is like, this guy averages a high yards per carry and he catches a lot of passes, and he's utilized in a certain way that may be conducive in the NFL. And I kind of see a path for him to have fantasy relevance, and it just didn't work out. I don't think that Sony Michel is a case of anything other than late production was one of the big red flags for him, and a little bit of an injury history. But most of it was really just it just didn't really work out in New England, right? He didn't become the back that we expected him to be. And in a lot of ways, Nick Chubb became the back that we thought he wasn't necessarily going to be because of the injury history. He was faster than we thought. And it just didn't work out that way. And that's fine. And that's just how it goes. But yeah, I don't wouldn't say it influenced the decision. I think that everyone kind of loves Sony to some degree, depending on who you were. And then there was the Nick Chubb people who were more into Nick Chubb and what he ultimately brought to the table.
Well, speaking of influence, the next question is, who were your biggest influences, again, outside of Sony Michel, it seems, who really influenced your jump into content creation?
Actually, the biggest influence for me is actually the person who took that picture on my wall. It's Peter McKinnon. He's a photographer from Toronto. Depending on how much YouTube you watch, you may be familiar with him or may not be familiar with him. But he was the reason why I bought a camera in the first place. He was the reason why I ever got into content creation in the first place. It was like I was at my old job where I used to plan renovations and I had a ton of free time because, pre-pandemic and stuff, we weren't overly busy. And so I was just like, on YouTube watching random videos. I was like looking up photography and stuff like that. Because when I was in university and even before that, I didn't really have a whole lot of hobbies. Like a lot of people, I played video games and, I watched a lot of TV, some movies. But outside of that, like I didn't paint. I didn't, play a ton of sports after high school. And then after that, it was just like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I really doing? And I kind of just discovered cameras. And I was like, these are so fascinating. Like, I couldn't imagine that there was more to a camera than, oh, hey, like smile, blah, 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 take the picture. Like it's so much more intricate than that, depending on what you're shooting, how you're shooting, all these various things, to the point where I almost challenged myself to learn. And so I just went, forget it. I'm buying a camera. Like after a week of kind of researching and looking, I was like, I'm buying a camera. I'm going to do it. And that was really what influenced me. And so kind of going full circle is that last year when I sold my first house, I actually bought one of his original prints of like one of his most famous shots. And so that's why it hangs up on my wall as like influence to remind myself, like he was the reason why I created content in the first place, and kind of like honoring him and what he did for me, because it ultimately led to everything that I'm doing right now.
It almost maps the journey a little bit. In this case, a physical representation of like the beginning of
Yeah.
your journey.
Yeah, no, honestly, it was literally me watching his videos and I remember watching the video about this shot in particular. It's called the bucket shot if you want to look it up on YouTube. But he's literally the reason why I picked up a camera, why I have a camera, why I learned how to edit videos, why I learned how to take photos, why I learned graphics, Photoshop, like pretty much everything I know now that I use daily in the content creation space is because I watched his videos and said, hey, I bet I could figure out how to use a camera. It's not as hard. It can't be as hard as people make it seem. And it is definitely much harder than people realize.
that nice balance there. But
yeah.
For the bucket shot, do you know where it was taken? Like where he was when
Yeah. So this is in Lake Louise in Alberta. And so,
okay.
yeah, so what's interesting about a little bit quick backstory is that what he wanted was a picture of the water when it's before it freezes, but there's snow on the mountains and on the ground. And so apparently it's like a very short window, about a week and a half before Lake Louise freezes, and there's snow on the ground. And so he literally took a helicopter and flew from Toronto to Alberta and took this shot. It's apparently like this shot that he wanted to take for years. And obviously he got it. And then I bought a print of it. So it's like a 1 of 250 print, and it has like a little plaque and everything. It's super cool. And but yeah, that's one of the reasons why I create content, is because he influenced that, and it's just kind of cool way to honor him and like pay it back to him for everything that he gave to me with just like 1 or 2 of his videos.
You talk about lessons learned, and you've already kind of given one lesson, right? Of just always be ready, always be prepared, and then seeking out the opportunities. But I guess you've already said, like, if anyone asks you starting out, just get started. But anything else you want to share to anyone who is maybe starting out watching this and isn't quite sure what to do?
Yeah, if for some reason you're watching me, and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, how do I get into the fantasy space? How do I create content?" The first thing I would tell you is that do not watch fantasy football content. Not because it's bad. I would say it's terrible in a lot of ways. Not because it's not good content, but in my opinion, if you really want to learn how to make good content, you don't follow sports people, you don't follow football people, you don't follow baseball people. You want to go to for me, it was Peter McKinnon, right? YC Imaging, Marquez Brownlee. Like there's literally people who it's their job to make content every day. And yes, fantasy sports people and betting people make great content for their audience. But imagine if you took that audience and you magnified it about 100-fold, and you're reaching a different type of audience that creates stuff for people who like cameras, people who like videography, people who, do real estate. Like, I think that the fantasy space is so small and so niche that people forget that regardless of how good you are in the fantasy space, there's always going to be someone way better than you who can teach you a ton of information. And I think that's how I ultimately stood out in the space, was that I was learning from people who didn't focus on football. They focused on making good content that people loved and engaged with. And that was where my foundation of content came from, and why I think I've been able to separate myself. So if I were you, I would go and look at the most famous content creators in the world, see what they do, and then figure out how do I apply their techniques and skills to fantasy football, because I think that's ultimately how you'll really stand out.
Gerson in the chat just mentioning a great guest. Apparently, I did a good job getting Jordan on. He has I think, Gerson has the Twitter handle right there too. So and he says,
Yeah, he
Heisman
must
for
be a
life.
Heisman. He must be a Heisman tier member. Shout out to all our Heisman tier members in the Patreon, patreon.com/all gas. Love our Heisman members. They're the best.
Yeah, everyone should wake up to the opportunities that exist on Patreon. So, which a lot of different types of hobbies can be found on Patreon. So,
Definitely.
you've already maybe mentioned one of yours with videography in general, but what are your favorite hobbies, Jordan?
My biggest one, honestly, is probably taking photos. It's something that if I had the means and I had a bit more dedication to do it, I would be doing it a lot more. It's one thing about photos, it's a lot easier than videos. It's just the truth. It's just the God's honest truth. Taking photos is way easier than video. People don't understand the amount of time, effort, and knowledge that goes into creating good videos. Where taking good photos, if you have a good camera, you can do about 90% of the work there. Then it's, the finer things, the details revolve around skill. But if you have good equipment, in a lot of ways, taking photos is super easy. And for me, where I live and the places that I can experience, it's just, for me, it's getting out, doing more traveling, experiencing things, and ultimately just taking more photos. Like, I'm still a person who is a little bit timid to have my camera in public. And once I kind of break that barrier, I think I'm going to be, taking a whole bunch of photos and making a bunch of content. But for me, it's just seeing a photo outside and being like, oh yeah, how do I make that the best photo I've ever taken? And what are the angles that can get that shot? And then once I actually take the shot, it's bringing it into my computer and ultimately turning it into the image that I saw in my head. Is for me the coolest thing. It's between that or taking a idea in my head about video and making it real. Like, one of the things I did, I don't know if you ever seen it on Twitter, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but I made a promo for NFL All Day, like just randomly one day. I was like, how have they never made this? I can't believe it. I knew where I'd find the footage. I knew how it would come together. And in like 2 hours, it was done. And so that's one thing for me that's always been really exciting, and something that's always been a hobby of mine is just like taking a random idea in my brain and just spitting it out as quick as possible. Because for me, there's just nothing more fulfilling than just having an idea that I absolutely love and then just like making it come to life with taking pictures or just making video or content or whatever it is.
You can go from inspiration to finished product everyone can see on the internet in just a couple
Yeah.
hours, you're saying.
Oh yeah, it's amazing when you are inspired, the amount of work that you can do quickly, and people are always surprised by how quickly I can get things done, because it's truly like when you're doing inspired work, it goes by really quick, and the time and effort you put into it can be 5 and 10 times more than you would for just, oh, I got to write this article for tomorrow on the waiver wire, and it's just, more mundane tasks that you're not as excited about. When you're truly inspired is when I think that people need to take more advantage of the things that they can do, because when you have an idea or you have a thought or even just maybe think you want to do something, challenge that concept and marinate that idea and start to write down how you would expand on that, and ultimately it could lead to something much larger than you ever pictured initially from your one little breakthrough or idea.
Inertia is the most difficult thing in the universe, but once it's there, the laws of physics just allow things to keep moving and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that we're going to talk physics here. I don't know if there's any advanced physics majors in here. Maybe there is. Maybe that's something we don't know. But I guess that's the next question. I'm not sure if you do know your answer to this, but what is
Mhm.
something that the fantasy community as a whole doesn't know about you, Jordan?
It's funny you bringing up physics. Just kind of thought of what my answer would probably be, and it's that I'm a biochem major and I'm a science nerd by trade. And I think it's one of the things that I wouldn't say separates me, because there's a lot of, I mean, we're all nerds at the end of the day. Let's be real. But it was just something that, like, it's going back to kind of where I started from, and how I wasn't overly artistic at a young age because it just didn't really make sense. But then as I got older, I was like, well, science really isn't my path. Like, I just kind of knew that from the beginning. And while I did it all in school, I was like, this is fun. I'm going to be a scientist. I'm going to go work in the lab. Like, that would be awesome. I was like, but people who work in labs don't get paid that well. Like, not a lot of them, right? I'm like, I don't really want that. If they're just going to bring in whoever and pay them 40K a year, I don't really want that to be me. And so I quickly was just like, you know what, forget that, and found my job where I was working in the renovations. And now, I'm creating content, and I'm a realtor by trade. But yeah, most people don't know that I always started as like a nerdy science lab rat who just wanted to be a mad scientist when he was younger.
Dexter's Lab, anything like that?
Honestly, I was, I went to university for biochem, graduated with honors. Like, I was always in the lab. It was tons of fun. Like, I remember organic chemistry, just like mixing stuff up, putting up all kinds of crazy stuff. I loved it. I truly did, but it just didn't really make sense financially for me in the end. So I was like, it was fun while it lasted, and it taught me a lot. But it wasn't really my path, I think, at the end of the day. But what I will say is that it did teach me really, like, how to think a certain way, and then from a really logical standpoint. Everything that I do has to be calculated, has to have reasoning behind it, or it just doesn't make sense in my brain now. And I think that's really what they taught me along the way, is just to think logically and think how you can ultimately get to the next level, but doing it with steps, and doing things the right way.
Well, yeah, setting you up to be, as Gerson saying, now you're in the fantasy football lab.
I definitely am. Yes, absolutely.
All right, so moving on to the next question. Maybe, and that you don't have to just include this to just sports. It could be science. It could be anything. But if you could interview one person all time, who would you love to interview?
It would be Chad Johnson, and it's not even close. It's not even close. He's the first jersey I ever got was a Chad Johnson jersey, not an Ocho Cinco jersey. My dad bought it in Cincinnati. He went to a game there, and he brought it back for me. By far, by far, he's the number one person I'd want to interview. I know a lot of people would want to interview someone super smart or the president, or like, no, I just want to have a dope ass time with Chad Johnson, talk about whatever, because he's just awesome, man. I just love him to death. He's probably my favorite athlete of all time. The energy he brings, the way he carries himself. He's smarter than people give him credit for, but he still knows how to have fun, how to have a good time, and really does like wear his emotions on his sleeve. And I really appreciate that about him. He's just awesome, and it would have to be him above anyone else. Like, maybe I'd go the Obama route if I didn't go to him. But when I thought of that question, I was like, I'm kind of goofy, I'm kind of fun. I think Chad Johnson's the person for me, and that's who I'd want to interview more than anybody else.
You're saying like hard on your sleeve. You feel like you could get like legit, honest answers from him. He would give you
A
the like
hundred
the
percent,
the,
a
the
hundred percent, he would. 100% he would, because that's just the person he is. Like, if you were to ask him a tough question and you were like honest and open about it, he would give you an honest and open answer and have like a real conversation. I think that would be awesome. I think that'd be really, really cool.
back to the science, the chemistry of the interviewer interviewee is
Yeah,
important.
absolutely, absolutely.
So I hope that's working here, folks. Yes, stay tuned in. And yeah, just I guess halfway through the show, just to plug a few things like our personal league podcasts we have ongoing for two. I know next week on next Wednesday, I believe, which will be what is Wednesday? Where's that calendar? When April 6th. Jeff Lambert will be hosting a live PLP, so personal league podcast. So what it is, a few of us from Going for Two, we get together, we'll go through an entire league, all 12 teams or 14, or however many teams there are. We'll go through individually, team by team, and as the panel try to talk about moves each manager can make, and try and converse about different strategies as well as specific players. Who to trade for, who to trade away. Sometimes it's okay. These are the players you can just drop based on the scoring, the formats, and so that's a lot of fun. And so yeah, they're gonna kind of show the world and do a live one coming up next week. As usually, again, personal league, we record them and we send them to the league, and at $100 usually the fee. I know at times Jeff will put on some specials for prices, but yeah, right now it's $100, which I think equates to for a 12-team league, you're not even paying $10 each. So hopefully we provide enough good content there. So again, check out next Wednesday as they do a live PLP. Keeping on the live show here, what is one revelation, Jordan, that you now have but wish you would have gotten earlier in your life?
So I was actually talking about this a little bit earlier, and I think I segued to it accidentally. But for me, it was not giving up my love of art. And not to say that I was like the best drawer in the world, because if there's one gap of knowledge I have, I can't draw like at all. It's just for whatever reason I can't do it. But I've always been good with colors. I've always, liked to paint and like the idea of being artistic. I just never ventured into the film and media side of it when realistically it makes sense. Like I was always into art and I took art classes all throughout high school and just like had fun with that because it was just something I enjoyed. It was relaxing. It was easy. I had fun with it. But again, in my head, I was like, okay, Jordan, like you're not actually going to be an artist and you're not actually going to be an athlete because you won't dedicate yourself to anything. So why don't you just dedicate yourself to science, right? Like I played football and that was fun. And, you do have some fun with the teammates, whatever. But at the end of the day, I have to do something with my life. And for me, it was science. And when I made that decision, I really left like everything else behind me. I stopped playing sports because when I was playing sports, my grades were not very good. And then I kind of gave up the whole art side of it too. And I really was just like, okay, you have to dedicate yourself to school because if you don't, like you're going to do nothing with your life basically. And so that for me was kind of, I wouldn't say it was tough because it was a choice I made that I knew was for the betterment of my future. But I wish that I kind of kept that with me because ultimately, if I did, I may have discovered cameras earlier. I may have, started creating content earlier and I would be a lot further than I am right now because I'm 28 now. I'm 28. And I still feel like I have so much to learn, but I still feel like I'm pretty old. And there's a lot of people younger than me that can do a lot more. And so I'm constantly playing catch up because I discovered all this stuff at such a later age and discovered this like hobby that I honestly love at such a late age in my life, or maybe not too late, but later than I would like, I guess to say. So if I had a revelation, it'd be to discover all this stuff earlier. So by now, be making bank off all this stuff.
So we're going to get to the more fantasy football questions, but we'll start with talking about, so you said you played football. What position did you play primarily?
I was a kicker and a wide receiver. So I had a soccer background. So kicking for me was pretty easy. I could hit a 45, 50 yarder relatively easily. And then, once I grew, I played wide receiver. But before that, I was strictly a kicker. So that was fun for my first 3 years. And then my last year, I grew and developed some hands. So I ultimately played wide receiver.
And since in Canada, the tendency as a kicker, did you also have to punt, knowing that the CFL, you see a lot of teams only have one kicker on the roster?
Oh no, I'm a terrible punter. I don't know. Like it's funny because in the NFL, right, you never see rarely. I don't think you ever really see punters and kickers do the same thing. You'll see some punters kick off, which is interesting, but you never really see a kicker slash punter. Like if you could do that, you would be a gold mine for all NFL teams because they only got to pay one guy. But I guess if one guy gets hurt, then they're screwed. So for me though, punting, I can't. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's technique, but because I play defense, so when like I don't know how familiar you are with soccer, but when the ball goes out of bounds, it goes 6 yard box. So I would kick it out, and I could kick it like 3/4 of the field. So that was kind of where I learned to kick that kind of set play style. But punting was just not happening for me ever.
So apparently, Gerson pushed back a little bit on your comments. Grew hands like Kenny Pickett. He grew his hands too. Apparently.
No, actually. So my hands were always big. It's funny because there's a picture of me in high school where I swear I must have had like fully grown hands because I looked like a gorilla. Like I'm not even joking because I was probably 5'3", but I have like 8.5-inch hands. And so it's just like I'm clearly disproportionate, but it took me not until grade 12 till I finally grew into like my full body. And I was able, and then I practiced a lot too, so that definitely helped. But it was just, yeah, there's some funny pictures of me back in the day where my hands are massive, but I'm still like really, really short, like shorter than all my friends I'm taller than now.
Always comes back to the pictures.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right, so these fantasy football questions. So right off the bat, what are your thoughts about the concept of zero RB?
I think as a widespread concept, it's a little bit overrated because for me, I don't draft for any particular strategy. I just draft based off the board, right? Depends on what comes to me, depends on the format. I would say that I'm not opposed to it. Like I've definitely drafted zero RB before, but I think even in the back of my mind, I'm always like, I gotta have one guy that I feel confident in as an RB1. I know there's a lot of guys out there. Scott Connor's one of them. We're actually talking in Ray's Discord on Thursday with Scott Connor talking about the concept of zero RB and how there's basically about 6 to 8 elite running backs that you want that are true difference makers every year. And then running backs 8 through, I think you believe the number he gave us was 22, are all within like 4 fantasy points per game, from like 16 fantasy points per game through 12 fantasy points per game. So you think about it from that standpoint, it's like, why are we really paying up for this RB9, RB10, RB11, RB12 when they're so replaceable compared to an RB18, RB20, RB22? And that's where I think the idea of zero RB starts. But people take it too far to the point where they're taking James White as their RB1, or they're taking, Tony Pollard as their RB1. It's like, I get it. I get what you're trying to do, and it might work out. But ultimately, all that kind of stuff is just luck. Like it's the luck of having the guy behind the dude who gets hurt and then becomes the starter. Like that's where the philosophy starts. But I think that it's, as a concept, it's overrated because ultimately you want to play the board. You want to play the hand you're dealt in your draft and not dedicate to one strategy. Because if you do that and the board doesn't dictate it, then you're ultimately still losing in the end.
And I think like if you were to take Tony Pollard as your RB1, you're really relying on when not necessarily knowing when to play him if Ezekiel Elliott is healthy. Like when is he going to get the long touchdown run? Tough to predict. But if Pollard is, let's say, your RB3 and he's around the same draft range, a little bit more flexibility on not having to start him. So maybe it sounds like you're more partial to the hero RB than zero RB.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. For me, it's honestly just I'm reading the board. I have, I played fantasy long enough that I kind of have all the strategies in my head that I could employ. But ultimately, it just kind of depends on how the board falls. If people want to, overrate a certain position, I'll take another position and I'll find my value, when it comes to me. And if it comes to me, ultimately, that's kind of the risk you run sometimes when you zag and everyone zigs. Is does the value ever come back? Maybe it doesn't, and you have to get pushed into a bad corner. But I always like to kind of employ that strategy because it's just about being flexible in your draft and ultimately trying to play the board and not trying to play the runs. Everyone tries to, I'm gonna take 2 running backs. I'm gonna start a run. It's like, but what if you don't? Then you're just taking 2 bad picks, right? So it's just, for me, it's playing the board and seeing what comes to me and how things fall overall and how my league mates react to my decisions and other people's decisions as to influence how I want to draft.
Sounds like you generally just try to stick to best player available as often as you can.
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe, not going into a draft with any further strategy than that, but then, maybe the strategy develops midway through the draft. You kind of, okay, this is the roster construction here, but not going into that up to that point hadn't been a conscious decision. It reveals itself how your strategy should be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can't go into a draft saying I'm going to draft a running back in the first round and a wide receiver. It's you could try, but it's ultimately not going to work out for you because every draft is completely unique. You have to be flexible. You have to have your tiers. You have to understand if a draft unfolds a certain way, how are you going to adjust based off of how you start, how you finish. But I also play in a lot of dynasty leagues, so there's millions of different strategies. If you're in a dynasty startup, you start trading away all your picks if you want, so you can completely rebuild from the very beginning. And so there's a lot of different strategies there, but especially for like yearly leagues and redraft leagues, it's just, for me, it's however the board falls is how I ultimately play it. I don't try to do one thing or the other. Hero RB would be great and how I'd prefer to play if possible. But if it doesn't work out that way, it doesn't work out that way. And you just kind of go another direction.
This is almost your creative influence. Does that almost come here? Like, it's the creativity of drafting of,
Oh
not,
yeah.
it's less the science of it, more the art of being in the draft room.
A little bit. I think part of it, honestly, for me is just where does the value lie? Like a lot of my brain is geared towards value. And so if it means I'm not taking a quarterback for the first 12 rounds of a superflex league, then I'm not going to do it. If the value doesn't make sense to me, I'm not going to do it because I've done a mock startup where the first 4 picks I took were wide receivers. And the reason why was because I thought it was the best value. I was like, I know I can get, 3 firsts for this guy. I can get 2 firsts for this guy, 2 firsts for this guy, 2 firsts for this guy. It's just, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of like, okay, my roster doesn't really make sense right now, but how would I rejig it to make it work better? Because even like we did a Superflex auction draft and everyone was paying up for quarterback and I didn't, right? I didn't at all. And I ultimately just traded my picks away for quarterbacks. And now my roster is loaded because I knew how I was going to get those quarterbacks back and how I was going to make that happen, but no one realized it in the moment, and that's why they let me kept stacking talent, because they didn't realize how I'd get quarterbacks. But in my back of my head, I was like, I know that I can make this work. It's just about getting the right players and enough talent to where I can make it happen. But definitely have to be flexible overall.
It's funny because you mentioned Scott Connor earlier, like how the RB2 is overrated. He also has segments where he talks about how the QB2 is overrated for that
Yeah.
big. As it gets to last year, I think the drop off was after QB14. You got to like the Kirk Cousins range, and
Yeah.
then it suddenly you saw the okay, everyone was pretty close, and then okay, just jump 4 points per game to the next guy, and go from QB15 down to QB 28, 29, and it's all relatively close. So you could pick at the end of that tier and not feel that you're that much further behind the people who picked QB 15, 16, 17.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where it's understanding, like I said, the tiers and the value gaps, and kind of how do you evaluate, how do you draft, and ultimately how do you want to build the lineup. This question here says, does your strategy change in newly fantasy format of dynasty best balls for startups? And it's like yes and no, right? Because best ball is very different. You have to understand that the scoring is different. You are very focused on roster construction, because if there's one thing we learned about underdog and all these various best ball leagues, is like roster construction is very important, and stacking is very important, and the value of a stack in a best ball league versus a conventional league, and all these various things that kind of go into it. And so for me, it does change a little bit, it for sure, because if you can get a stack, it can be extremely valuable. Like I remember in this league I was talking about, the auction league, it's a best ball league. I traded for Aaron Rodgers and I had DeVante Adams. I was like, yes, like I have the stack, we're ready to go. And I had Russell, and then I traded for Russell Wilson. I already had Tyler Lockett. So I'm like, yes, I have another stack. Like that's perfect. My top two QBs are now stacked. And boom, two trades happen. Now I have no stacks. And my roster just looks significantly different than it did before. Because again, that what you're looking for in best ball is the ceiling, right? If you don't pay attention to what's going on, you can really fall behind from a potential point standpoint, because your ceiling week to week is so much lower. When you have a stack in best ball, that can mean, 3 touchdowns to one player, massive, massive upside, versus just kind of having some good players and ultimately putting it together. But roster construction is so important, and ultimately putting your roster together, amount of running backs and wide receivers and tight ends to make it all work week to week, is one of the best ways that you can build a great roster in best ball.
Yeah, unfortunately, Gerson feels your pain. He had Patrick Mahomes stacked with Tyreek Hill, and now he
Yeah.
says, "Thanks a lot, Dolphins."
Yep. I
It's
had this similar result on both sides, right? You have Mahomes. I actually had one where I had Mahomes and traded for JuJu in the previous season when he was still in Pittsburgh. So now I have that stat kind of out of nowhere. But then I also had Tyreek Hill in that roster. So he's now in Miami. It is what it is, right? You try to make the moves at the time the best you can, but ultimately you can only control so much in fantasy football.
And I mean, to be fair, like in your case, there, you're probably losing a bit of Tyreek's value in terms of the lack of QB efficiency.
Oh,
Especially,
absolutely.
you might still see a lot of targets, so the volume might not be so bad. But with Hill leaving, it probably does up Juju's target share in that offense. Is
Have
probably
to
very
imagine so,
clearly
right?
at least as it stands right now, very clearly the number two, and maybe he comes in and just takes all of Hill's targets from last season.
Yeah, I have to imagine, right? But the problem is that you look at the two receivers and you're like, I'm not really sure how this is going to work, because Juju does what Kelsey does really well, or he does what even less than Kelsey does. If Kelsey's the intermediate guy and Juju's the
Uh-huh.
short area guy, and then who's the deep guy? Is it Mecole? Because no one's scared of Mecole, so it doesn't really open up things down the field. Do they bring in Jameson Williams? Do they bring in someone else who's fast and can kind of go deep? We don't really know what the Chiefs are going to do. I have to imagine Jameson Williams at the top of their list, but I mean, if they don't get him, I really don't know what they're going to do, because that deep threat just isn't there in the offense, and it won't be opening up what the potential of the offense could be with a deep threat on the roster.
It's funny because Juju coming into the league, I remember being, when he was before he got drafted, it was almost that expectation. Okay, what team is going to use him as a deep threat? I don't know that he was necessarily going to be pigeonholed as into the slot as much as Pittsburgh did. So I wonder if Kansas City goes back to maybe that our initial evaluation and Juju's usage has been more about the quarterback than anything else. So I do wonder if
Maybe.
he has a chance to maybe be that deep threat too at times.
Potentially, but the problem is that, like, you look at the receivers who have performed outside on Pittsburgh better than he did, right? Everyone thought, Antonio Brown is only so good and they'll get rid of him. Then Juju's going to be the guy. And Juju really struggled. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He really struggled playing outside, whether it's the Pittsburgh system, I don't know. But Chase Claypool looks better than him outside. Deontay Johnson looks better than him outside. The next receiver they bring in Pittsburgh will probably look better than him outside. So I don't really know what to make of Juju playing on the outside. But to your point, though, Tyreek Hill wasn't really used as a deep threat this season. His ADOT, I believe, was only like 10 or 12 yards per reception. And yeah, we think of Tyreek Hill as this 15, 18, 17 yard per reception guy. And he wasn't that. He was a PPR machine this year. I believe he had 120 receptions this year, the highest of his career by a mile. So we'll see, right? If they can use Juju in that role, will he be as successful? No, I just don't think it's possible given his talent disparity between him and Tyreek Hill. But I think there's a world where, to your point, he can be used in kind of that same type of situation. The issue is that when Tyreek Hill runs a dig route and he cuts in, you're not fearful of Juju running deep on you, but you're fearful Tyreek will keep running past you. And that's the obvious discrepancy between the two players.
Yeah, and just to your point with Tyreek Hill, 111 catches last season. His previous high, he had hit it twice actually, 87. So a bit of an uptick. But even so, he had 2 seasons of 87 catches, and in both those seasons he had more receiving yards than he did last year with 111 catches. Still at over 1,200, but he had a 1,400-yard season on only 18 catches one year. So the yards per receptions kind of dipped down. Last year was the lowest other than his rookie year when he had less than 600 yards receiving. So you throw that out a little bit. But yeah, the evolution of Tyreek Hill's role does almost fit well with the Dolphins in a sense of what Tua seemed to do well. And I don't know, with that, I could see Waddle and Hill kind of coexisting, and the offense kind of just is basically those two. So I don't know that like Hill going there necessarily hurts Waddle as much as it say hurts Mike Gesicki. I think he might be someone, especially this year, that really suffers from that, because he had 112 targets last year, which almost was maybe a quiet 112. And I don't, that I think will be really hard pressed to duplicate that number.
Yeah, for sure. And like you're saying, right? Like Tyreek Hill's going to be the one. You don't trade for a guy and pay him $30 million for him not to be the one. And like you said, Waddle can still produce. I think the issue for Waddle now is that initially we thought, well, he's a great player, right? But he was kind of used in this short passing game. It didn't make sense. Like Waddle's a 4.2 guy, insane speed. He can run deep routes. But I think now it's just, this is the player he's probably going to be in Miami. He's going to be to a safety net. He's going to be a PPR machine. He's going to be a really souped up version of what Jarvis Landry used to be. And then you have Tyreek Hill, who can, he can play in all fields. He can run short. Like even this season, we saw his production in the short area passing game and what he did after the catch. But he can still run those deep routes. He can still be the deep threat. Obviously, today they traded away DeVante Parker. So we'll see how they use Gesicki. But I think, it'll be like you said, heavy dose of the run game. Those two big receivers, talented as hell, fast as hell, impossible to defend. And then maybe some Gesicki sprinkled in. We'll see. They also signed Cedric Wilson. So we'll see how those guys all kind of fit together. But ultimately, I think that it's going to be Tyreek Hill as the one and then Waddle's the two. The issue really is that Waddle was being drafted as like a top 6 dynasty receiver, and now he's nowhere close to that. And I made the comparison almost to T. Higgins, right? T. Higgins is not a wide receiver one by any mention because he plays with Jamar Chase, right? But ultimately, he's still that close in value. Like he gets the volume. And I think that Waddle can be very close to that. And why I believe he will still be worth a lot in Dynasty, but not necessarily have the ceiling that we expected him to potentially have playing by himself in Miami.
Yeah, it seems like, just to talk about the role, Miami is almost seeing, Waddle, Hill, these really fast guys, we're not going to use their speed to stretch the defense. We're going to use their speed they can maximize after the catch.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what this offense is, right? It's getting the ball out quick. It's what Tua needs because he hasn't had time. We'll see with the new offensive line kind of how they've done a good job rebuilding it, right? And I think potentially even through the draft, they try to add that a little bit. We'll see, because obviously now they have some limited picks from that regard. But I think overall, what they're going to do is just get the ball out quick. This is what Kyle Shanahan does. And we'll see how Mike McDaniel ultimately builds this offense with all these guys now. But he's got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. He's got 3 capable running backs, one who's already familiar with the system, and Raheem Mostert. And then they have capable tight ends, like whether it's, I don't know if Adam Shaheen's still there, but they got Gesicki there. They got whole bunch of guys. Hunter Long's still there. Like there's going to be bodies that they can figure out in this offense. And it'll just be, how do we cover all of these people? Because while it doesn't seem like a lot, if someone sneaks out on you, they're probably gone, because we know that Gesicki's a freak athlete. We know that all these running backs are fast. And if the receivers are get out on you, that's it. It's over. We saw it against Buffalo. Tyreek Hill catches a 15-yard dig route and he takes it all the way to the house. He splits 3 defenders, and all of a sudden the game feels like it's over. It's game-breaking speed, it's space and pace, and the way these guys operate and how they play together. It should be really exciting. I'm excited for the Dolphins offense. It should be a lot of fun this year.
Yeah, they definitely, it seems like they have a type. They want athletic skill position players, very fast skill position players across the board. Even before free agency started, they signed DeVante Deadman, who was a CFL All-Star last year on Ottawa, and they were pretty brutal last year, but he was definitely the bright spot of that team, both as a special teams player, returning as a returner, led the league in return yards last year, both on combined kickoffs and punts, but probably individually on both as well. And was kind of like their main receiver on offense as well. And a lot of it's kind of similar to Waddle and Hill, using his speed. Again, we'll say speed relative. He was really fast in the CFL. He probably won't be as fast compared to everyone else in the NFL, but like, again, using that after the catch. And that was what a lot of short routes and almost Deebo Samuel-esque, because they were kind of using him to run the football a bit in Ottawa as well. So I wouldn't say that Paul LaPolice is as creative as Kyle Shanahan, but there's a little bit of that with DeVante Deadman. So if he, he's probably not locked to make that team, but if he does, I'd imagine he's maybe a primary returner for them who, if he occasionally contributes on offense, it's to almost replace Waddle or Hill in that role for that short speed, short area speed guy.
Yeah, man. And ultimately, you always need guys that are fast, that can return punts and kicks, are shifty, and can stretch the field. Like those guys are always going to be valuable in the NFL. It's just whether or not he can do enough, like you said, to make a roster, because he doesn't have the draft capital, he doesn't have the cachet, he doesn't have the name value. He's just a guy that they saw potential in, that they brought to the NFL, right? And we'll see what happens. But I hope that he can carve a role, because that'd be really, really exciting, right? To take, whenever you see a CFL player go in the NFL, you're like, I'm always like, man, like, please just stick. Like, please, because it's always going the other way. Right. You might see a lineman here or there go from the CFL to the NFL, but it's so rare. But it would be awesome to see someone from the CFL kind of stick in some capacity in the NFL.
Yeah. The Cameron Wake success stories seem like they're rare to that extent.
Definitely.
But yeah, back to our league's fantasy football. Is there a league format that you prefer, Jordan?
So for me, I think it has to be super flex. Like it would have to be super flex. I would say I'm into tight end premium. I think that there is some fun to be had with tight end premium leagues. Whether you want to go tight end premium or you want to go to start 2 tight ends, because those are a doozy. When you got to start 2 tight ends, it's disgusting. But it makes it more fun because there's different draft strategies, there's different things you can do, and I think it opens up a lot of new avenues for fantasy football. Everyone likes their traditional, start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 quarterback. I get it. It's what you're used to. But if there's one thing I could tell you, it's playing super flex, playing a tight end premium, expand your horizons, playing some wacky formats like Scott Fish Bowl every year, crazy formats, tons of different options, high point scoring, big play scoring. Like there's so many different ways you can play fantasy football. And I would encourage a lot of people to discover different formats, because there's so many different ways to play. And you can play your, boring, simple, standard way, PPR, whatever. It's okay. I don't dislike it. But I think the more crazy you add to it, it makes it more difficult to dominate, because you can't just listen to a few podcasts, learn a strategy, and that's the way to win. With all these different scoring options, it makes dominating and winning year over year so much more difficult, because the strategy is always changing, because the values and the players are always changing. Like now, Ray and I were just talking about it. The running backs are very devalued in Dynasty right now because they're all old. Like every running back is old. They're all 25 plus, 26 plus, other than like 3 or 4 guys. Breece Hall is being pegged as a top 5 running back because he's 21 and going to be a bell cow in the NFL. And that's a massive value gap you can take advantage of in Dynasty. And so for me, I think it's just exploring these different formats, because if you do, you're going to be opening yourself to degen levels far beyond your wildest dreams. And more importantly, you'll become more well-rounded in the values of fantasy football, simply beyond your standard leagues. And so for me, it's super flex, tight end premium, and for the love of God, best ball, please. I play in too many fantasy leagues. I'm getting old. I'm tired of setting lineups. Just give me best ball in every league, and I'm super happy. Just I love best ball for that reason. I draft the team, I can make trades, do waiver wires, but I never have to set a lineup. So on Sundays, all I got to do is relax.
So you love this, as Gers mentioned, this new kind of concept, especially towards Dynasty, of having best balls.
Oh, I love it. It's amazing because the thing for me that is that I love the offseason. I love the draft. I love the scouting process. I love waivers. I love, diving into preseason games and, who's doing well and where are the depth charts and how is this unfolding and where do I project these players to be? What are their roles? And if you can hit on some of these small things in Dynasty, that's what makes it fun. Like when I set the wrong guy in my lineup, that's not fun. Like it's a dynasty. Like all these players should count to some degree. And I get it. Everyone wants to, it's setting lineups is a skill. And I listen to start sit, so I'm good at this. And I get like it's a skill. It's fun. Whatever. Have your fun with it. But I think it kind of defeats the purpose in dynasty because in dynasty it's about building the best team at the end of the day, right? Like, do you build for depth? Do you build for boom plays? Do you build with a stack? How do you want to build? I think that's what it's all about. It's about building a good team. And so in a redraft league, yes, set your lineups because it makes a big difference. Like if you're redrafting and playing best ball, what are you really doing in fantasy football? But for dynasty people, it's so much more about the offseason, about the draft, about the scouting process, about the waiver wire when you're picking up the right guys, dropping the right guys, making the right trades, win now moves, all these various things. It's not so much about setting lineups. It's just about building a good roster. And so for me, I think if I would have my pick, if I was starting any league, it would absolutely be best ball, mainly because I'm already in like 10 leagues. I don't really want to join another one. I have to set in a lineup, but it's best ball's fun. I think it's a lot more fun from just a team building standpoint. That's why I really, really enjoy it.
All right. Well, I mean, that covers format, that covers settings. So next question is your all-time favorite or your all-time fantasy QB1, RB1, wide receiver one, and tight end one.
So for me, it would have to start with Tom Brady at quarterback because he's the best quarterback of all time, right? I could say Peyton Manning, I could say, Lamar Jackson, Michael Vick, whoever. I get it. But for me, it's still Tom Brady because Tom Brady's going to orchestrate the offense. And he's been a QB1. He could do it again. Maybe I go Patrick Mahomes because he's just fantasy god and he can just do it all. But I think I'm going to go with Tom Brady. Running back's going to be LT. I could go with Christian McCaffrey, but Christian McCaffrey isn't quite LT yet, so I'm going with LT. Randy Moss, because Randy Moss, one of the fastest receivers ever, one of the best receivers ever. Tight end is Rob Gronkowski, because, again, you got to have the stack. So you've got to go with Brady. You got to go with Gronk, because it's just an unstoppable duo. I mean, you just got to do it. And so you think about, you saw that offense before, Brady, Moss, Gronk, then you throw in LT, and it's just unstoppable. It's just unstoppable. I love it.
Yes. So it's a bit of a best ball league with knowing you got the triple stack going.
Got to do it. It's just the best offense of all time. And for a while, for a little bit, right? 50 touchdowns, unbeatable, almost went undefeated. Stupid Giants, but it was a good season though. It really was.
Well, touchdowns, right? Like it'd be like you've got LT, who is the single season scrimmage touchdown leader, 31,
Yeah.
I believe, in 2006. Randy Moss, I believe, holds the single season receiving touchdown mark. So
Yeah.
emphasis on the touchdowns in fantasy, kind of to your credit. And again, we love those in best ball because you'll always get them in your lineup every time. Not that like a guy like LT would probably have been in the lineup every week. He scored those 31 touchdowns.
100%. You got to do it, man. It's all about touchdowns. As much as we want to talk about PPR and bonuses, live or die by the touchdowns. It's always going to matter. And these guys, touchdown machines. So you got to go with all of them for me. It's just how I got to play. It's all about touchdowns.
Well, shameless plug to my goal line guide in season I did last year for full press coverage. Plan to do that again next year. So trying to predict those touchdowns and maybe a little more predictable than it's given credit for, right? Like, touchdown regression is just going to change. But, DJ Moore's had 4 touchdowns 3 straight years in a row, even though he's had, 1,200 yards each of those years. So
300 yards per touchdown for his entire career. Just embarrassing. Just embarrassing. I don't know if it's embarrassing for him or for the franchise, but it's just embarrassing.
Well, and I've mentioned the stat before. Peter Howard talks about the decade-long NFL average is about a touchdown every 155 yards. Based on that, DJ Moore should, through 4 seasons, have about 29 touchdowns. He has 14, literally half of what we'd expect him to get. So, sorry, DJ Moore, get us some more touchdowns.
Phenomenal talent, terrible at scoring touchdowns. Like, that's just
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
comes down to, unfortunately for DJ Moore.
Yeah, he only has four. Even if you get one more and be five, it'd be a nice prime number. But yeah, we're gonna get to that high five section, top five in five different categories to end the show here, Jordan. So I'm gonna start
Awesome.
with your top five artists or bands.
So number one is Black. Anyone who knows me knows Black is my favorite artist. I was listening to him today actually. J. Cole will be number two. Dave is number three from the UK. Dude is just phenomenal. Just released an album last year. Crazy, crazy good. Big Crit. For people who don't know Big Crit's one of my favorite artists of all time. And then it's kind of a side note is Kygo. I love Kygo. Chill House is like some of my favorite music to listen to when I'm working or even just working out. And Kygo is like by far for me the best chill house artist, band, DJ out there. I love all this music. So for me, he has probably got to be in the top five, even though he's not a rapper, and that's really what I'm listening to for the most part. I got to show him some love because I listen to his music literally all the time.
I'm not overly familiar with Big Crit. Do they do a lot of
Okay.
like D&D references, like the Critical Role, like Rolling 20, or no? Am I reading that wrong?
You are reading that slightly wrong. So Crit stands for King Remembered in Time. He's a Dirty South rapper. He's probably like 35, almost 40 now. He's been around for a while. But yeah, he's kind of, I wouldn't say he's known for being underground, but he's not mainstream at all. If I would give you one album to listen to, it would probably be Cadillactica. Is his, in my opinion, by far his best album. Tons of mixtapes and stuff that he's put out. Super, super talented guy. The biggest thing with him is that he actually produces a lot of his music. So especially early in his
Mhm.
career, he produced all of his music. So it's just one of those guys you just have a really big appreciation for because the talent's just like absurd. The way that he raps, the way he produces his songs, like you can tell the level of care that he puts into all of it. And so for me, it's just something that I've always really loved about artists. And it's one of the reasons why I like J. Cole too, because J. Cole is the same kind of way. Like early in his career, not so much, but as he gotten older and learned how to produce, he starts to produce songs for himself. And you can really tell when someone is that in tune with their craft that they can produce something that they also rap to. It creates a much larger synergy than just a producer and rapper making a song together. And you can usually tell the difference. And Big Crit on Cadillactica, I believe he produced the entire thing himself. And then after that album, he kind of gave way to other things. But that was one of his, like, for me, one of his signature albums that I think is probably his best project to date.
All right, so Big Crit, Cadillactica. But yeah, like, the idea, like I think synergy is a good word to say, right? Because as the creator of the beat, but also the verses, the rap that you're doing, you know how to tailor the beat. Where certain louder parts are hitting to where the rhythm of this. Like there's a lot of, like I
Yeah,
said, synergy.
it's the creative ability to do both, right? And like you said, it's lining it all up. So you know when you say this word, this is gonna hit, and this is gonna flow in this way, and you'll add in this sound and this sample, and it's just a completely different level of creating content, and it's no different than anything, right? If I'm a podcaster and I don't know how to mix audio, I'm not going to be the best podcaster in the world because the best podcaster in the world will understand how audio works, will understand how to EQ their voice, will understand how to cut things and curate things and transition music and make everything flow together. It all ties in. It always ties in. The more you know about your craft and how it can all come together as one is ultimately how you'll be the best version of a creator overall.
Understand not just the front end of it, what the viewers are getting, but also how it all functions at the back end.
Absolutely.
All right, next one is top five books.
This is tough for me because I'm not a reader. So I had to like really think about this hard.
You have
And
to read
so
about a
one of
lot of books to read.
No, I had to think like deep because I'm like, how many books have I even read? Do I read a lot? I'm like, should I just say Sports Illustrated issues 1 through 500? No, that wouldn't be good. But the first book is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I could probably name 3 or 4 Malcolm Gladwell books. I only put in one. He's just for me, he's just an author that I really, really enjoy. I really like his style. I like the way that he curates his pieces. It's just Outliers is kind of his signature book, and it's one that I read in like 2 or 3 days. So I just really enjoyed it. And so I would definitely recommend it. The 10,000 hour rule is the rule that it's not really a real rule, and he admitted it's not really real, but it made for a really good book when he wrote Outliers. And so that's kind of where the 10,000 hour rule came from. Is from his book Outliers. So if you've never read it, I would highly recommend it. It's very eye opening if you've never read Outliers. Second is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Big fan of Nike, big fan of a lot of what they do, and so naturally reading his biography about his story and how it ultimately came to be was really interesting for me. So I would highly recommend Shoe Dog if you haven't read that. Crushing It by Gary Vee is really, really good. It's one for me that I discovered kind of during the pandemic when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And just kind of, and the weird thing about it was that, like, I get not everyone likes his style, but if you just read his book and read some of the stories that he's telling in the book, they're all inspirational. Like, they're all these people just like that kind of figure out a way to start a business or create content or whatever. And some of the people you may even know, like one of the dudes who's in the book is Jared Polin, who's a famous photographer, videographer. So when I was like discovering photography, videography, and I read this part, I'm like, holy shit! Like, I know Jared Polin. Like, he's super famous, has like 1 million subscribers on YouTube. I'm like, damn, like he's in this book. Like, maybe I could be in the book. Like that. But again, it's just one of those things that it's something that I would read late at night, and I would legit be up till like 3 or 4 in the morning because I would have like 5, 6, 7, 8 ideas of things that I wanted to do, and it's just inspired off of reading 10 pages. And so for me, I think if you're looking to be inspired, it's one of those books that can help get new ideas out of you and inspire you to some degree. And like I talked about earlier, being inspired is very important to me, and I think it's a way to get a lot out of yourself if you're looking to create content. The next book is a book I read. The next 2 books I read in high school, but they're really good books. The Book of Negroes, really, really good book. I read it, I think in grade 11 or grade 12. Really, really good book. One of the few books I actually read front to back. It's just, I don't even remember what the whole story is about, but takes place on a slave ship for probably like 300 pages, and just like all the things they go through super detailed, and the story of this woman who's coming to America to be a slave and how she ultimately gets set free and all these things. But the story is like insanely detailed, super gruesome, and like the things that they had to go through. So would recommend it. It's it's a little bit detailed, a little bit gross. A lot of things happen, and then a lot of not so nice things happen. But it's a really, really good book if you like to read. It's like 560 pages, massive book, but really, really good. And then the last one is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. So it's actually the autobiography of her life. And so she's like talking the story of her upbringing, and they actually made a movie about it like really recently, but I haven't seen it yet because obviously I read the book, so I wasn't really too concerned about it. But it's a really good book. It's about her autobiography, and it's talking about her dad and her mom and how she was poor and how they're moving from house to house and all these things. And so it all revolves around the story of the fact that they live in a glass castle because they don't actually have a home, and her father was super fragile, and like all these things. A lot of metaphors tied into it, but it's a really, really good book. It's The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walsh. Really, really good book. I would recommend it. And it's short, unlike The Book of Negroes. So if you want to read a short book and then watch the movie, I would recommend it. It's a good one.
I guess inspiration's the word of the day on this episode. Used it so many
Yes,
times.
absolutely.
And
I always love to be inspired by whoever. It doesn't matter who it is. It's always good to be inspired.
Awesome. And you mentioned movies. We're not going to normally, the next question would be top 5 movies. We're actually going to do top 5 TV shows here.
Yes, because I don't watch a lot of movies, and so I would have to dive deep. So books, I'm like, okay, I can't dodge books, but maybe I can dodge movies because I've watched. Everyone watches movies, I was gonna say, The Dark Knight for me is number 1. I really like District 9, and after that, I was like, man, like I can't even think of other movies that I really, really like whether it be Wolf of Wall Street or Goodfellas. I really like. After that, I was kind of like, eh. So I'm gonna give you my top 5 TV shows. Number 1 is The Wire. I love The Wire. Greatest TV show of all time. I've watched it like 10,000 times. It's just so good. Jimmy McNulty, one of the best characters of all time. Stringer Bell is just incredible. Omar, R.I.P. Amazing. I love The Wire. Sopranos, number 2. Rest in peace, James Gandolfini. I just actually rewatched this show as well. Love The Sopranos. It's a little bit long for my take. Have you seen it?
No, not really. I've seen a few episodes, but not enough to say I've
So
seen
The
it.
Sopranos is great the first time. The second time though, it drags a little bit. It's a little long. So watch it one time, then you're probably good after that. Third is Entourage. Entourage is my by far favorite show. I can't tell you how many times I've watched the whole show and then the movie after the fact because I just like legit run through the whole thing. I get it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's like just guys being guys, doing whatever, running into trouble, blah, blah, blah. It's the fantasy of just being famous with your friends, but it's an awesome show and I love it. The fourth show is Sherlock. I love Sherlock. Such a good show. For people who don't understand, like in my opinion, BBC produces some of the best television, period. And part of it is the actual cinematography of it. And I just love so much about what they do in Sherlock. I could have went with Black Mirror. I could have went with a few other British shows that I really, really like. But for me, Sherlock was by far the best one. Luther is another one. I don't know if you've seen Luther with Idris Elba. Fantastic show. Really, really good.
Back to
But
the wire again, Idris Elba.
yeah, the craziest thing, first time I watched that show, had no idea he was British. Didn't know at all. Watched the entire show, had no idea he was British. But the fifth show is The Shield. Have you ever seen The Shield?
No, I haven't actually.
The Shield is really good. So The Shield it was made, I believe, by 21st Century Fox. And it's crazy because the only reason why I discovered it was like one day I posted on Facebook. So it tells you automatically how long ago this was. I was like, oh, so like, what are some TV show recommendations? And one of my buddies was like, oh, why don't you watch The Shield? I was like, okay, cool. I've never watched it. It's a Michael Chiklis show, and he's the lead. He plays a cop. Like, I'm super into cop dramas, if that's not clear based off of this list where like police are involved in every single one. But it revolves around like they're corrupt cops, right? And so they have deals with drug dealers, and they steal from drug dealers on top of also selling drugs themselves. Bro, it's crazy. But the thing that I really love about it is that it's a cable television show, so it doesn't move that slow. Like, it's pretty fast, and like every episode, there's always things going on, so it's very engaging and very good to watch. So I would highly recommend it if you can find it. I don't know where it's streamed, if anywhere, but if you can find The Shield, torrent it, depending on your ethics. It's a great show. It's a very fast pace and has a lot of really familiar actors in it, depending on how many shows you've watched. And I'm a really big fan of it. It's an older one, not one people would really say, but it's one of my favorites for sure. What are your top 5 TV shows, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot? I'm just curious because you seem like you were vibing with my list a little bit, and so I'm curious. Sounds like we got some of the similar ones as far as that's concerned.
Well, it's funny because one thing I want to say about The Wire is it really, like, at the turn of the millennium, it really seemed like it was one of the first. Like, as much as McNulty is he's the first character in terms of like the credits for the actor,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it really is carried by the entire cast. Like, it really does feel like an ensemble show.
100%.
Eventually, you saw things like Lost that really kind of pushed that envelope. So yeah, The Wire, I think, definitely really inspirational, seems, for a lot of other shows. I would say my top 2 for sure are Breaking Bad and 19-2. It's a Canadian show. So Radio Canada and CBC both produced a version of it kind of in parallel. So you've got a French version and an English version of basically the same story. It's a cop show, so you would enjoy it if you're able to. I know here in Canada, I believe the English version streamed on Crave.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check it out for sure.
I don't know that you would necessarily want to find the French version, but if you can, I think they're both worth watching. Tremendous, great show. I think you mentioned, and I know actually what you talked about already about like camera work and things like that. I find Breaking Bad and 19-2 for me are 2 of the greatest shows in terms of camera work and just the tone, knowing that. Mm-hmm. Walter White, his name is White, but it really is a shades of gray, like the idea of
100%.
He's the protagonist, but he's also probably the biggest antagonist in the show, and how the self-destructive nature. So it's not it's not black and white. It's a lot of gray, and it feels like tonally, the way it's filmed, a lot of toned down, not too bright colors, not overly saturated. And I find Breaking Bad and 19-2 are both done that way, and it adds to the somber move and the seriousness of the show, of both shows. So I think those are like the top tier for me. It'd be those 2. And then after that, it's probably a wide gap. I'd say Lost is up there. The Wire is a good one. Battlestar Galactica, because I'm a bit of a sci-fi nerd. I thought the new version of the show came out in the mid 2000s. I guess 5 seasons of that. That's pretty great. So that'd probably be my top 5.
Solid list.
Gerson likes Ari on Entourage and says he's the best, so I think he approves your Entourage.
Fucking hilarious, man. Oh my god, one of the best characters in a TV show of all time, by far. Ari Gold.
So last 2 questions. First one is the top 5 game day foods.
So this is gonna be pretty standard: pizza, nachos, wings, chips, and then I love candy. So I gotta have some form of candy in there that I can just munch on. Swedish berries, maybe some Sour Patch Kids, Fuzzy Peaches, something from Maynard. It's got to be in there. I just love candy. So pizza, nachos, wings, chips, and then some form of candy's got to be in there.
Awesome. Yeah, I love
Prison
the.
Break. Oh no, too long. Prison Break season 1, and then just turn it off after that. What kind of a show is it out there? If they escape, it's Prison Break. When they escape, the show's over. There's nothing else to see there. As far as I'm concerned, I think season 2 is okay. Season 3 is kind of like fine. In my opinion, season 1, shut it off after that. Where are you at with Prison Break?
I love all 4 seasons. I do think the first season is the best because
Yeah,
the tattoo. The tattoo
yeah,
adds something that no other show has. So what it has in season 1 is sort of like a completely original concept, but maybe couldn't quite. It's really tough to carry that aspect of the show. Like there's some elements of the tattoo in season 2, but like it really doesn't by season 3. Like
yeah,
they have to. The idea of the prison break, though, like how do you the interesting way to end season 2 to kind of force that narrative back in season 3, but it gets away
yeah.
from the tattoo, and I thought that just makes it such a crazy concept of a show.
Mhm.
I don't want to say it's like a one season wonder, like say Heroes, where I think even though season 2 wasn't bad, but I really think it really drops off after that. I say
Yeah,
I feel like the other 3 seasons of Prison Break are fine, just don't quite match up to the first season.
yeah, for sure, for sure. What would if
And
you had to pick one show, the best season of all time? What would it be?
so it's probably season 2 of 19-2.
Okay.
Honestly, I think there's sort of the end of season 1 kind of reveals that there's going to be a bit of a mystery, like there's something to figure out through the show that a certain character has to figure out, but also as the audience we get to try and figure it out as well along with him. So the whole season 2 is kind of this mystery aspect to go along with other great stuff. And back to the camera work, the season 2 premiere. So the French version is the original version of the show. Had 3 seasons. It was the same director for all 3 seasons. I think his name is Floods, is kind of his stage name. I know
Mhm.
he's maybe done some other Canadian things. Gerson says Dexter's a great show. I'll rant about that in a sec too. But the English version of 19-2, they didn't bring Floods in to direct it, except for the season 2 premiere, because that's one where it's basically frame for frame almost the same, especially a sequence where it's a continuous shot for 13 straight minutes. It's one
Wow.
of the most incredible things I've ever seen. And having done it already in the French version, it was easy to kind of know what they had to do when he did it again in the English version. But yeah, so like that's something where if you watch only one version, you don't miss out on that episode because it's the same. The season 2 premiere is the same for both seasons. Really,
Yeah.
season 1 of 19-2 English version really it's basically the same as season 1 in the French version. Season 2, it's again the first episode starts identical, slightly deviates, and then season 3 and 4 of the English version are completely different. And then
Mhm.
of just season 3 and like they actually had an extra season in the English version too, so totally changed the story. But Dexter to me, Gerson, is kind of like Heroes in that I don't think the drop off is as quick. I think the first 5 seasons are incredible, but then after that, I think it drops off pretty bad to where it gets almost as bad as some of those last seasons of Heroes. Personally,
Yeah, so I'm glad Dexter was brought up because one of my favorite seasons from any show, like I think number 1 is probably season 4 of The Wire, but then season 4
mm,
of Dexter for me is one of the greatest seasons of television all time with the Trinity Killer, right?
yep.
And one of the reasons why is you say seasons 1 to 5 are really good, but for me season 3 is terrible. Like season 3 is just god awful. There's a lot of people I know who turned off Dexter like because of season 3 because it was so bad. But then it's wild because you have this season with like this sort of killer, sort of bad guy. Him and Dexter are friends. It's like super weird, and it didn't really work for me. But then you go into season 4 with the Trinity Killer, and it's just like episode after episode after episode after episode was like so good. And for me, it's probably one of the best television seasons that I've ever seen. Is just the way that it just comes together, and the way the Trinity Killer just like works his way into the story, not out of nowhere. You see it coming, but it's just so well done, and it's just acted incredibly well. One of my favorites by far.
Yeah, John Lithgow, quite a departure from what we've used to see John Lithgow in a lot of
Yeah.
shows before that. So showed his range as an actor for sure. Interesting that you said because I think if I had to pick a favorite season from The Wire, I'd probably actually say season 3. So interesting that you said season 4 is
Okay,
your
yeah,
favorite.
season 3 is good, as long as it's not season 2, because season 2 is the worst. It's still good, but it's the worst.
I think, yeah, it's funny because I think there's a dynamic to The Wire. They create so much chaos, like at the end of season 1, they kind of bring it to some extremes, and then they have to really pull it back for it to logical, so they can build it up again for the big
Yeah,
chaos in season 3. Like I found like
yeah.
the dynamic of how like each of the seasons work in The Wire is a little strange too. So
Yeah, well,
um,
did you ever like I don't know how deeply you've looked into The Wire, but the cool thing about it for people who don't really know is that every season revolves around a different theme,
yep.
right? And so that's one of the things that not everyone picks up on when they watch it. And one of the reasons why I really like season 5, because season 5 is all about the politics and the media and
Hmm.
and the newspaper, right? And so
Journalism, yeah.
it's just a really cool season that they put together. But yeah, season 2 with the docs, I'm just it's a fine season, but it's just not really one of the better ones that they did. But like you said, it's because they had to kind of rework the story a little bit for season 3 and season 4, which is just both of them are just incredible.
Yeah, you're right. Because everything is okay. Different employees of the pillars of what makes a city, right? And like it really is the first season really does focus on the police and the people that they're trying to work against. But then yeah, dock workers, especially for a city like Baltimore, right in the port, like super important to
Hmm.
the industry.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of what the scene. I know season 4 is really education, and we see
yeah.
like the school systems. Like you say in journalism. Uh, it's
Season
funny.
3
Season
is Amsterdam. That's the one. I believe it's mostly it's kind of tied between season 3 and season 4. But I believe Amsterdam was in season 3
Okay. All right. Yeah, because it's funny.
when
It's
they
a
legalized
season. I don't
drugs.
even know what the theme is. So there you go. Uh,
Yeah.
but yes. All right. So one final question here: your top 5 favorite sports moments. So we are going to bring it back to the sports to end it.
So this can be divisive because I feel like people won't like these answers. They're all going to be pretty recent. So number one is 28-3, the Pats beating the Falcons.
Ugh.
I remember watching that game. It was brutal because I mean I'm a Pats fan, so I was already pretty sad. But I was in college. I was watching it with a bunch of people who like were my friends, but they weren't like sports people. So it was just like really annoying. Like my team was getting killed, and a bunch of people were like having fun and like, oh, let's watch the halftime show. I'm like, get the hell out of my house. Like just leave. I was just pissed. And then obviously they came back and won. And it was just like awesome, like super, super excited. And then number 2 for me, one of the most exciting moments that I've ever watched on TV was Villanova's Chris Jenkins hitting the game winner over North Carolina. Just for me, it's still one of the most incredible game winners in tournament history. Like to win the national championship on a game winner, it happens, but that was probably one of the most exciting ones I've seen in recent memory. One of the ones that people may remember, people may not remember, was on Sunday Night Football when Gronk flipped into the end zone against the Chiefs. I don't remember what year it was because I just don't remember, but I was actually at that game. So that was the first football game my dad ever took me to in New England. And I was literally, I remember I went to, it was halftime. I went and got McDonald's. And when I was walking up the tunnel, Brady hit Gronk on the sideline. He's running down, and I watched him flip into the end zone. As I was like walking up the tunnel, it was crazy. And the stadium just like went nuts. Foxborough is a madhouse. Like I've been to Detroit, I've been to Foxborough, I've been to Buffalo. Buffalo's crazy too, but Foxborough nuts. Traffic terrible. Just don't expect to be home in the next 4 hours. It's not going to happen. Number 4 was the Cubs versus the Guardians or Indians, depending on where you are. um, that World Series Game 7, I was just so invested in that World Series. I watched every game start to finish. Like it was so back and forth. The ninth inning home run with Rajai Davis to left field. And then the Cubs ultimately come back. It was just crazy. One of the most exciting sporting events from a back and forth perspective across basically the course of a whole week. I feel like we've been spoiled in recent memory with how good the World Series has been in recent times, but this was one of probably my favorites. And then the other one of my favorite moments I've ever watched, period, was Nathan Navaldi's 2018 World Series Game 6 or Game 3, 6 inning performance in extra innings. He came in the 12th and pitched 6 scoreless innings in Dodger Stadium. I remember staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning watching that game just to watch the Red Sox lose. But it was by far one of the best pitching performances I've ever seen in the postseason. Obviously, the Red Sox went on to win, and that was awesome. But it's one of just the craziest. Like, I know that people think the football is the greatest sport, and you know it's all our favorite sport, but one of the craziest things you'll ever see is Nathan Eovaldi pitching 6 innings every single time, game on the line. Like no matter what, he ultimately someone hit a walk-off home run. I mean, eventually it's going to happen, but to pitch 6 innings called on in the 12th inning. Every pitch counts. Every pitch matters. One of the most spectacular pitching performances I've ever seen in my life.
So Gerson just chiming in, his favorite sports moment is on the Wake Up podcast. I guess Ray got up and was like actually blocking. You saw the big quad muscles. You could tell that, okay, yeah, he was in the NCAA. Like he played college ball. He knows what he's doing. So definitely also a great lesson for everyone learning the blocking technique.
Yes, that was not planned. Like, I know that people may think that these things are planned. None of it is ever planned. That was 100% impromptu Ray being Ray. But
He was
yeah,
inspired.
one of the funniest moments on the show for sure. One of the funniest moments on the show ever, by far.
Sorry, I was inspired to interrupt you there. But yes,
No
pure
worries.
inspiration. That's what we're talking
Trust
about.
me, I do a show with Ray every day, so I'm used to being interrupted. So please never feel bad. I always find a way to take it in grace.
All right. Well, very graceful for your presence here, Jordan. Really, thank you for joining us. Thought this was a great conversation, and again, hopefully, people got to know you a little better. But and if they liked what they saw, let them know where they can find you every morning.
Yeah, you can find me Monday through Thursday on Wake Up with Ray G on Ray's YouTube channel. You can go in youtube.com/RayGQ if you want to check it out. You know, Ray's not hard to find. You search him up on Twitter, RayGQ. I'm the co-host and producer of Wake Up with Ray G Monday through Friday. We think we have all the links in the bio for the podcast. It's a podcast feed. We got the patreon.com/all gas if you want to learn even more. We do live streams. This week we got Scott Connor on the Spaces. Ray does his film breakdowns in there. All kinds of crazy stuff. I think it's like 800 people, just mad football fans. We're getting into more sports betting. You know, we do prize picks every day, more stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. The conglomerate is growing and it's only getting bigger and bigger. So I would highly suggest you check out any of our content. And, you know, just if you like it, give us a follow. Check it out. Subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and then follow you. That's it. Follow Going for Two. Follow everybody because there's tons of great content here as well. I don't need to tell you that. So make sure you follow all the great content. You're here listening, expand your horizons a little bit, but then come back because there's tons of great content here too. So check me out and then check out more of the Going for Two content. It's easy.
Appreciate that. I know Gerson's shout out getting the Heisman tier on
Heisman
Patreon.
tier is legit. They get a lot of benefits. If you want access to Ray pretty much every day, join the Heisman tier because we hop in live chats and talk almost every single day. It's a lot of we learn a lot in there from not just people think that we are just spitting it. No, every Heisman member super knowledgeable, willing to participate. It's tons of fun and we appreciate them all, man. They're all awesome and we appreciate having them in the Discord.
And not to put pressure on people, right? Because anyone joining you maybe doesn't feel like they have the knowledge yet to be earned to be in that tier. Quickly being in that tier, you're probably will gain the knowledge. So
yeah, it's honestly it's a really accepting group. We've had a lot of new people join recently because before it was restricted, but then we opened it back up again. And yeah, we've had lots of people join and they've said that like it's the by far their favorite part of the community. We've had people who were in the lower tiers and they came up and it's just for them it makes a big difference. They like the access. It's our whole team, you know, whether it's the 40 chess guys, whether it's Benny B, whether it's, you know, the off the line guys, there's lots of guys that we have on our team that do podcasts for us. And you have access to all of them, whether you're doing redraft, strategy, dynasty, Devi, like it's one of the best ways to really get involved in the community. And again, you know, it comes at a cost, but a lot of people have said very good things about it and they've only been in there, you know, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And again, that value comes back pretty quickly when you get your questions answered. You just have a live discussion with everybody in the Discord who's in that tier because it's only accessible to them and that's it.
Frankly, you're probably investing more time in there anyway than you are at the actual money, like just in terms of the amount of time you in the chats and talking. So anyone who is paying, they probably like you're saying,
I
it
can't tell you,
worth it.
man. I can't tell you. Like I'm talking 8 hours a day sometimes. Like we may get off the show. I may upload the podcast, and by the time I upload the podcast, all of a sudden they're in live chat. They're talking about whatever, and we'll just be in there, like just hanging out for most of the day. Ray may pop out for a little bit when he goes to work, but then he gets to work, and then we pop back in there and we talk some more about whatever. There's always stuff going on, always people in the chats, and not even just Ray or I or the team, like other patrons who are willing to, you know, talk with you, have a discussion, talk about value, and just have other people to bounce an opinion off of. So for me, I think that's where the value really lies is the community is massive, but in that select tier of individuals, I think the benefits, if you, again, you have to have the time to really make it worth it for you. But if you are willing to dedicate that time, you can learn and grow and really build a lot of friendships within the group. Like we have two Heisman members now who do the 4D Chess podcast for us. They just started off as Heisman members, became friends, and now they do a podcast under Destination Devi. And so it's crazy to us, even it's wild. But people, like you said, people don't know. Ray and I have never met in person before, ever. Like he's literally my internet friend, and until I meet him, that's all he'll be. And so again, you never know. You never know what you may do and what could influence your decisions and how it could lead you somewhere down the road. But all you got to do is just try different things and be open-minded, and you never know where it may lead to.
Great positive message. I think we'll end with that. Before we ramble on too much here, getting to the hour-and-a-half mark. But yeah, really appreciate it, Jordan. Again, check out everything Going for Two live on Twitter at Going for Two Live, Going for _2 for all the great articles, content similar to what Jay and Ray do with the Wake Up.
I like that. I like that. Jay and Ray. I wish more people said it that way. Put me first. Put some respect on my name.
You're the one that's here, not Ray. So I think I felt like I have a choice. But yeah, so I mean, just like the fact that you guys are into different sports, and I think that's something at Going for Two. There's tons of great basketball DFS content, especially the baseball stuff's going to come too now that seems like that's back in swing, and of course all the fantasy football content. In terms of press coverage, so this is an unusual night to be on Saturday. Usually it's Mondays. Last 2 weeks, actually, 2 weeks in a row, we've done 2 episodes on Saturdays. So interesting change up. But next episode will be Monday, April 18th. So we're going to get back to that every 2 weeks on Monday schedule. Actually, back-to-back Canadian guests. That'll be. I'm going to have Josh Smokey Hell Nelson on. So
nice.
Moving out to the West Coast. I think he's out on the West Coast. So
yeah, he's in BC. I'm pretty sure BC or Alberta.
I thought he was in BC as well. So I think we'll go with that. That seems like that's the instinct. We're inspired to say that. But yes, hopefully people are inspired off this conversation, Jordan. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And let's just be inspired. Try new things. Follow some great content creators and just make something of your life. Don't just slave away at your desk, at your job. Become a content creator. It's fun. It's hard, but it's fun.
That's the wake up everyone needs, right?
Yeah, wake up with Ray G. 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. I can't believe I do it every day, but wouldn't change a thing. I love it. So much fun. So much fun.
Well, I thought this was so much fun. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time, and I just can't thank you enough. No one invites me on their podcast, but I appreciate you having me, and I hope you had fun too, because I had fun.
Yeah, it was a blast. Hope all the listeners and viewers felt the same. And on behalf of Jordan, and again, this is Kyle Senra signing out for